I have had as a mantra of mine for the longest while that I never want to stop asking myself what I want to be when I grow up. And I believe that, I say that now, and I hope I always continue saying that.
Welcome to the Be Student Podcast, and thank you for joining me. On today's episode, we're going to give you a masterclass in how to sharpen your curiosity muscle with Dr. Keith Whittingham of the Rollins, Crummer Graduate School of Business and Artifx Cafe. Being a lifelong learner can lead to big success as an entrepreneur and more. Today's masterclass is well worth a listen, so let's get started. Very privileged to have our guest with us today, Dr. Keith Whittingham, who's an associate professor at the Rollins Crummer Graduate School of Business, the owner of Artifx Cafe, a specialty coffee company whose coffees are sourced in a manner that uplifts coffee growers and their communities. And he is the chair of the board of the Winter Park Chamber of Commerce for 2026. Welcome, Keith. I'm so glad you made time to be with us today.
My great pleasure to be with you, Betsy. Thank you.
So there's so many things I was looking forward to talking about today. And on this podcast, as you know, we start with the B side to people's records. So I think we're going to get to the really cool Rollins Crummer Graduate School of Business piece later, because I think that's the part that people kind of know you best for. But I want to start by talking about what you're doing by uplifting coffee growers. You and I had what I think was a transformational conversation about maybe a year and a half to 2 years ago about the communities that you serve. And, I think about Winter Park in Central Florida being one of those communities, but you're also transforming lives in Costa Rica in the communities that you serve there through the work that you do in corporate sustainability and social responsibility. And I think that that's part of the brand that the students who work with you at Rollins reflect. This is the there behind working with Dr. Whittingham. And I know that that's a passion project for you. So if you would tell us a little bit about maybe your approach to that piece. And then I want to pick a little bit more at the fact that you're a global citizen, and there's a lot to unpack today. So this is going to be a really cool episode, but tell us a little bit about your side hustle with Artifx Cafe and how that came to be, because I think we'll probably weave in a bunch of other things.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I smiled a little bit when you first mentioned the B side, because I often ask myself, which of my sides is the B side? Which of the many sides?
What do you think? Did I get it right or no?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Hard to say. You maybe at the end of this conversation, you let me know.
Maybe you have a C and D side. Maybe you're a full DVD set.
There we go. So Artifx Cafe was born out of the work I've done teaching sustainability. So for about 16, almost 17 years now, I've been taking Rollins MBA students to Costa Rica and to other parts of the world, but to Costa Rica most frequently to study global sustainability. One of the smartest things I think I've done in my entire career, because I've had several careers at this point, but one of the smartest things I did was design a class that absolutely forces me every year to take a group of students to Costa Rica. Well, it's a brilliant move on my part, but we weren't there studying anything to do with coffee, right? So we were looking at sustainable development.
Help people understand what you mean when you say that, because I think there's some people, sustainable development. Yes, okay. I think there's people that totally understand that, and maybe people who don't have quite as much of an understanding of it.
Sure, and it's there are a plethora of definitions that are out there. I won't get into the academic definitions, again, of which there are several. But for me, I grew up, all of this is really connected. I grew up in the Caribbean, and I grew up, when we talk about development of nations, there are paths to development. And some of those paths are paths that lead to I'll get a little bit academic. In a way, companies are chasing GDP growth in the same way countries are chasing GDP growth in the same way that companies are chasing, the bottom line growth of their net income. How you go about that is there are a variety of ways you can do that. And there are ways that have better long-term impact for your society, for your natural resources, for the environment, et cetera, and others that are more exploitative. Et cetera.
We're going way beyond talking about a company recycling program.
Yeah,
right?
we certainly
way
are.
beyond that.
Yes, yeah. We're talking about the choices.
Our listeners have some examples.
Okay, so I'll use Costa Rica as an example. Okay. So, and you can compare it with many of the other countries that were coming out of colonialism through the 1900s, and had choices around how they would spend their money, their revenue as a nation. And I will preface this by saying that I am not an economist or anything like that. But
you're going to sound like one here in a
that's
minute.
the problem. That's
the
danger. That's the danger I run into. Right?
Then you can sit right next to me if you want to sound like an economist. I'm happy about that.
No, but so Costa Rica, for example, through a variety of events that occurred, made a decision around 1950 to totally abolish their military. How they got to that point is a story of interesting history. But they made that decision. And what it allowed them to do was, instead of investing the kind of resources that many, many, many countries have to invest in their military, they put that money into education, into healthcare, and to other parts of the social fabric. Costa Rica
has the most literate people in the entire world now, right?
Workforce. I don't know the actual numbers on that, but they certainly have a very highly
and everyone speaks both English and Spanish, right?
A lot of people. The proportion of people who speak English is relatively high. A big part of that in response to the tourism industry that they have. But,
so for people that think corporate social responsibility or sustainability is about do-goody stuff, actually, there's an economic benefit to doing this, right?
There sure is.
And if you do it right, you're going to end up creating a virtuous cycle of profitability, right?
And as we talk about Costa Rica as an example, right? So that to me would be an example of sustainable development. So they've been able to grow in a way that has, they are not like I don't think there are any countries that are doing this perfectly. Just as there are no companies, I think, that are doing sustainability and social responsibility perfectly. But they're, I think, a good example of a country that attempted to develop in a way that was more sustainable. So when we think of sustainable development, I think that would be a good example.
Right, not just churn and burn for today, but thinking way downstream.
Correct. And unfortunately, the global model for growth, has for economic growth of countries, has led many countries down a pathway that has opened their societies and their base of natural resources up to very significant exploitation. Not to say that has not happened in Costa Rica and other places, but I think that would be an example in Costa Rica of a pathway to a more sustainable development, as opposed to other kinds of development that is less sustainable. So I couch all of that to give you asked for a definition of sustainable development. So
I didn't mean to pull you off course, but I want to make sure that we're evangelizing people to some degree about
and
this.
I say I'm not an expert in sustainable development because that's the sustainable development and corporate sustainability are, of course, different things.
Right.
But it gives you a sense of, when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about taking a more holistic approach to arriving at our goals as a nation or as a corporation or
the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Correct. Yeah. Right. How do we arrive at this at the greater good while we are doing what we are doing? So in corporate sustainability, yes, I attempt to show our students that there's a pathway through which corporations can do well while doing good. It doesn't have to be an either or a trade-off.
This has made you one of the most popular professors at the Crummer Graduate School of Business. You have street cred, Keith. You do. I have one of your former students used to work on my staff, and I've had many of your students remark to me that, Dr. Whittingham is the greatest, and we loved his class, and it changed my life. Do you know people say that about you?
I have had, I'll say this, I have had students. So I teach courses around corporate social responsibility and sustainability. And I also teach our intro statistics class. And I've had students.
Real glad I don't have to take that.
It's interesting. Those were the students who first said, they would talk about my, wow, you're so passionate about this stuff. And I used to say, wait till you see me teach sustainability. Right?
Instead of statistics?
I bring a lot of myself to my teaching. I try to. And I think that comes across whether I'm teaching the stuff that's more sexy these days, or statistics, right? The course that nobody wants to take and nobody wants to teach. But I try to.
So here we are in Costa Rica. You're going back year after year with your cohort of students, and Now you're a coffee entrepreneur. Tell us about the link between those things.
Yeah. So, one decision I made. So we would take our students to do global consulting projects in various parts of the world. And I took a group down to work on a project that was connected to a coffee farm, but it wasn't really about coffee. It was more around tourism, around educational tourism.
Oh, okay.
And then after that year, it was very successful. People were asking me, where are you going next? And there's something about this community of Monteverde, Costa Rica, that drew me in from the very, very first visit. And I decided to go back. And I will say this, that's probably one of the most impactful decisions that I've made.
What do you think drew you to Monteverde?
Monteverde is a really, really special place. It draws a lot of people for a lot of different kinds of reasons.
Now I have FOMO. I want to go to Monteverde. Just listening, I'm like, what's the big deal? I have to go see.
Come on down. It is a place that has a very unique, a very interesting history, a very interesting culture of its own, almost within the context of Costa Rica, but there's a sense of community there that I felt from early on. That was more obvious to me than I felt in other places. A real sense of heart. Maybe it was the people that I was connected with from early on, from my first visits there.
Were they mostly farmers or people from
it was a mix.
all different industries?
But it's a community that was primarily, 100 years ago, was a rural agricultural community, and dairy later on, in coffee, but other kinds of subsistence farming. It happens to be located on the edge of an ecosystem called a cloud forest, which is different from a rainforest. But due to parts of its history and other things, there were early efforts to do conservation there. And born out of that conservation efforts and the biologists who were coming down to study this unique ecosystem and the people they were bringing along with them, out of that grew a community of ecotourism. It was really one of the first ecotourism destinations in the world.
Okay.
And there's a commitment to that conservation, but there's also a strong commitment to the community, because that transition from a primarily agricultural community to one that is now primarily based in terms of people's resources in the service industry has a lot of really interesting challenge and dynamic. And there's some, I don't know, the other side of it, I will say for me, Monteverde grabbed me in a deeply personal and spiritual way. I'd say more than anything else.
Well, it's in a cloud forest. I don't know what that is, but that just sounds
It just
magical.
sounds cool, doesn't it?
And maybe that's why your coffee tastes so good. Because truth be told, Artifx coffee is delicious, and it does have a distinctive taste. Maybe it's the cloud forest.
We can get into that. I firmly believe that coffee, like wine, has what people call a terroir. Okay,
a terroir.
It's a French word that is in wine. It's a wine thing, but it's true for other things as well. It really basically is a combination of the climate and the soil and all of those things that come together to give the wine, give the grapes a particular characteristic that leads to wine's flavors, and that's very, very true in coffee. And the thing about coffee that I absolutely love, there are a handful of things, but one of the things for me that I try to promote and share with people whenever I can is the nuance in coffee. The coffee is not just coffee. I mean, there is the subtle differences in the flavors and aromas that come out of coffee can vary from one side of a valley to the other, right?
Yeah.
Based on that combination of climate and soil and amount of sun and where I always go when I hear from people, and even myself when I taste our coffees, and they are really, really great, and I attribute just about all of that to the farmers and the love and the care that they put into.
So how many farmers are we talking about now that you're working with?
Well, in Costa Rica, I work with one farming group, a family that operates a farm that's actually 5 parcels of land that's they work with other smaller farmers around. In Mexico, I work with a group of farmers. It's a cooperative that's a much larger group of much smaller farmers. So it really varies a lot from place to place.
Okay.
But for me, the thing that always was interesting was, let me finish making the connection between how I got into coffee in the first place. Around the third year of going back to Costa Rica, I started going in between my visits with my students for doing research and other kinds of things. And I was just meeting people, and I started to connect more with a variety of farmers and hear more of their stories and understand which I hadn't really gotten a clear sense of before, the disconnect between producers of global agricultural products and the consumers. Especially coffee is grown, like many products, it's grown in a place that is far distant from the places that are the biggest consumers of the product. So it's a very long, complex value chain, and the large companies on the retail end sort of have the most sway, and they know how much margin they want to get, and they have the market power and strength and so on. And it ends up leaving very little for the farmers on the front end. Okay. And there's a whole history behind that. The coffee industry was born in a time, all right? I mean, if you think historically of when coffee was growing on the global scale, this is a time, it was born in a time of colonialism and slavery. And the models haven't changed a lot since then until very recently. But if you think, that was the ethos around the development of the coffee industry in the 1800s and 1900s. And yeah, there wasn't, and traditionally has not been a lot left for the farmers. As a matter of fact, when we're talking about rural agricultural producers, they're not walking around for the most part with MBAs where they can analyze their P&L and talk about, So you had farmers who were losing money and don't even know, right? They're not. They don't have systems to keep track of their costs and so on. Now, the farmers that I have been working with are not in that situation, but the reality out there is that the market as a whole has not left a livelihood for the producers. And this is not just a coffee thing. This is a cocoa thing. This is it's very true in a lot of global agriculture. And the good thing is that for some time now, for some decades now, even some of the big companies have been trying to have realized this because the farmers have been walking away, and their kids want nothing to do with growing coffee because they've seen their parents and grandparents struggle for decades, so there's nothing to show for it, and they're like,
when they can become Instagram influencers.
Well, exactly, right, yeah, they can do better going into the city and working on in any kind of operation, even at minimum wage, and do better than that. So a lot of companies are recognizing that, hey, if we continue on with business as usual, we're not going to have anybody farming our product not enough to maintain the demand that we've been marketing our way to. So that's been an interesting shift that's changed quite a bit in, again, the last couple of decades. What struck me, though, was that there was a need to look at different kinds of business models, and I had some really interesting conversations with people. And for me, the idea that I thought as direct as possible a connection between the producer and the consumer would do a couple of things. One, it would cut out a lot of intermediaries and leave more money for the folks up front, the farmers. It would also, if I could do my job really well, which I'm always learning how to do better and better, create a connection between the community of consumers and the community of producers. And you hear a lot more talk about that now than even when we started. Well, exactly. Yeah. But there's a lot of talk about, do you know where your coffee comes from and so on. It's great. For me, it's great to see a lot more companies starting to try to make that connection.
So the model is to really shorten that tail between production, farming, and then to table, really. It's that whole thing, because the consumer wants it shorter, the farmer wants it shorter, and the owner of the business wants it shorter so that there's more profit.
Yeah, that's right. And I've modeled it. I think of it often as tunneling through a hill. And there's a lot behind that as well, right? But there's a big barrier in between the producers and the consumers. The biggest part of that barrier being shipping, honestly. Right. The only affordable way to really to ship coffee around the world is in 40-foot containers. Right. So you need a lot of coffee to be moved in order to ship that, affordably. So there are aggregators on the front end. And these are all intermediaries that are buying from individual farmers and buying from mills and so on. And then you have the exporters from, the producing countries who are buying all of this stuff. They're putting it on ships and sending it over to importers now and brokers who are then disseminating it out back to the mom and pop coffee shops or the very large, coffee companies on the retail end. And along the way, you sort of need to have intermediaries because it's very difficult for an individual farmer to sell their product to an individual consumer. Now, the internet and things like and current modern logistics are making that more possible. But there are also intermediate processing steps as well. So I thought I visualize it as like a hill, this barrier, and we need to like create a tunnel in between, from but
this
from
tunnel
one
is
end
being
to the other.
built by a business school professor. So I'm thinking about the farmers that you represent, how well served they are by the methodologies that you've refined as a business school professor, understanding supply chain, understand where the tunneling is going to have resistance, understanding how we can work around that. Talk about what you bring now from the methodologies as a business school professor to this process of Artifx Cafe.
Yeah. Well, part of it is really having a view of the supply chain and understanding where those aggregators and disaggregators are necessary, but what their role could be, right, and how can we adapt that. So, for example, the model that I've attempted to adopt is to have as few links in that value chain as possible in order to, again, conserve more income retention on the front end, allow the farmers to, as we'd say, to capture more of the value that they're creating. And then the things that I don't do, I try to do through strategic alliances, for example. So right now, I don't do my own roasting, but I partner with a roaster.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I have
do you roast on that side or over when it gets to America?
Here, yeah. Okay. Generally, we roast here in Orlando. Generally, it's better to roast the coffee as close to the consumer
Shows you
as
what
you
I
can.
know.
Well, no, but that's not
make me sound like a coffee nerd.
But with modern logistics, there actually are companies who are roasting at origin, as we say,
okay,
where the coffee is produced,
okay,
and then shipping by air and so on in relatively small quantities. I guess, okay, with logistics, the modernities of logistics are moving prices down, not far enough down, but in some cases
right,
they're doing it that way as well.
Right.
But yeah, generally we do the roasting air locally. Yeah.
So the name Artifx, can you talk about the origin of that name and how that's linking into some of the branding decisions you've made? And
sure, certainly. So it's complicated, especially when you look at the spelling of Artifx. It seems like it's missing a vowel somewhere. It's actually a contraction of two words, artisanal, which to me captures the love and the care and the craft that goes into the production side of the cup. We see a lot of we think of craft roasting and we the art, the latte art and everything. I'm like, no, the art starts way before that, and I think of Cesar Santamaria, for example, who's in charge of coffee production on this farm in Canitas in Costa Rica, who, in my view, and he'd probably, roll his eyes or, if he heard me say this, I think of him as an artist.
But also, can we just anchor in for a minute? Cesar Santamaria sounds like a better name than a marketing department could come up with for a coffee brand ambassador, right? Like that's Valdez, pretty authentic and wonderful. I love it. Okay.
So for me, that's where the art. That's where the art begins. Okay,
right?
The love and the care and the craft. And if I could only show you, which I would love to do, because I have actually started taking clients down to on origin trips to visit the farm. We have someone in common who's gone down there and enjoyed it.
Who's actually met Cesar?
Not he hasn't met Cesar, but he met a lot of the other folks on the team down there. But yeah, it really is a love and a craft and the work they're doing to conserve the forest around their farm, and so on. So that's the artisanal part of it. The second part is the word farm works, which I chose to use because it's really about farm products, and that's not just coffee, but other kinds of things. But I also chose to spell it WORX, so that FX is from farm works, but it's that's where the name comes from. But the art is a big thing, and it part of it is my goal, my dream was that if I share with you a cup of Artifx Cafe coffee, I want you to feel connected to that community in some way, and I can do that through the aroma, through the taste. But the other side of that for me was the use of art. Mm-hmm. I feel, and this is one of the beliefs of Artifx Cafe, is that farm products like coffee are as much an artifact of a community as music and dance and other forms of culture. It's hard to the aromas and the flavors can only take you so far if you don't understand the rest of the community or haven't been there. But art is a more direct visual connection for a lot of people. So on our coffees, we use on our labels art by artists from the local communities where the coffee's from, and it's just a way of trying to bridge.
And I've actually met the artist that's done your labels.
Who works with our coffees from Monteverde, from Costa Rica. Yeah.
Well, I love this whole story. And I want to go now to maybe your seaside. I don't know. We have so many sides here. You trained at a doctorate level program at Cornell in electrical engineering.
That is correct.
So I think some of that tunneling through the mountain is the iterative process that you learn as an engineer, that you've got to iterate, refine, iterate, refine, iterate, refine. I've watched you apply the discipline that you learn as an engineer to kind of refining and perfecting how you get this coffee to, as you say, to the cup. And you went to an Ivy League school and got a PhD in this. And then you had this career where you worked for Bell Labs, which in the 50s was spooky territory and it was secret and people were building all kinds of interesting things there. And
I was not working for them in the 50s, so just to be clear.
I know that.
Okay,
but I mean, if you said you didn't even say you worked for Bell Labs in the 50s. It was still quite hush-hush, and it was considered the apogee of, like, if you were a great engineer and you got to land in Bell Labs, you were at the top of the game. So you leave engineering PhD land to be at the top of the game in engineering and pivot out to coffee production and teaching at Rollins College Graduate School of Business. So can we hear about that transition? Because I find this interesting. You know, you have this warm approachability that lands you in the leaderboard of one of the most beloved professors at a business school. But come on, that's a serious nerd background in engineering. And it's sort of this thing that you have to dig for to find in who you are. But you bring that discipline to the problem solving of entrepreneurship. And I think that's one of the reasons why you've been successful with this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. You know, I think I used to say as I got further down my studies in engineering, especially I got to my PhD, I said, okay, this is really, I'm learning how to learn. Okay. And yes, I look at engineering certainly gave me a perspective on approaching problems, on driving towards solutions that I think has been really, really useful. But I really think, for example, at the PhD level was more about how do you ask the right questions? How do you learning how to try to ask the right questions? And I think that has helped me in a lot of ways in many different kinds of endeavors. So I worked for Bell Labs for a number of years. Funny, the tunneling analogy is, and again, I really won't go into this, but it actually did come out of my engineering work because I was working in the semiconductor business, and there's a concept in quantum mechanics called tunneling, and that's really where the analogy came from when I think about that. So I worked for Bell Labs and in an R&D group that was attached to a manufacturing organization here in Orlando. I was an electrical engineer, but I actually was, and my students got a kick out of this, and I tell them I was a crystal grower, and the eyebrows start to go up. And I'm like, yeah, but not the kind of crystal. I didn't really, that concept kind of changed, I think, when Breaking Bad came out. But so I worked in that industry at a time when the tech bubble was like getting ready to burst. And if you know anything about the history of Bell Labs, it really was the preeminent R&D organization in electronics and math and
spooky stuff,
and weird stuff. Yeah. For a long time, and there's another whole story and learning to come out of its demise. But bottom line was that I've had students ask me, how did you make that transition from a PhD in engineering to teaching business? And I'm like, trust me, you don't want to follow exactly the path I took because it involved being laid off and all sorts of things. So when the company made the decision to close that facility, I had an option to go back to our headquarters of that organization at the time was in Pennsylvania, and I had done my MBA at Rollins part-time, in the executive MBA program on weekends back then, and I liked the Central Florida area, and I wanted to stay connected to Winter Park, stay connected to Orlando. I didn't feel like moving, so I kind of rolled the dice and was out of work for quite a while, looking for some things to do. And one of the things that's interesting is I did my PhD because I wanted to teach. In my mind, I was going to be teaching engineering back at Howard University, where I did my undergrad work. And the path didn't take me exactly that route, but I found myself engaging in a teaching role particularly I got asked to teach our data analysis class, right? So it was coming out of my engineering background. It was like, hey, here's a person who already has a PhD, who's got some chops around managing data and analyzing data. It's somebody we know because I had been a student there at Rollins. So I got asked to come in and join the team, and ultimately led to a teaching role in that space. And then that, as I mentioned, is what led ultimately to the coffee roll. So it was a sequence of things that I could never have mapped out for you. And it's one of the things that's it's been part of the trajectory of my life has been, I've learned long ago that there are a lot of paths to get from point A to point B. And you have to trust and kind of believe in the process, understand where you want to go and why. And for me, like, I knew I wanted to teach, but if I had understood more about what my passions were and my internal drivers, I'd have probably been less hung up about exactly what happened along the way to get there, than trusting the process to get me ultimately to a place where, I'm living out what I ultimately wanted to do, but in a way that looks nothing like what I
So using your values as more of navigational beacons than anything else, right? Sort of anchoring in, because, so many of our listeners are young. And I'm going to define young as under 40. I would say about 70% of them are young. And so I think one of the things they're looking for in listening is connecting to mentorship. So what can they learn from this journey of yours, which had some twists and turns? And I think all great journeys do, right? But so someone looking at you today would say, oh, he's got it all, right? He's got the Ivy League PhD, and he teaches at a business school. He's an entrepreneur. He's really got a handle on all this, but they don't always see the twists and turns that got you there. I think your superpower is your curiosity. And when we talked about pursuing various leadership roles, you said to me, I'm so excited about what I'm going to learn. And you bring this learner's methodology to everything that you do. And what we hear right now is that hiring managers are somewhat reluctant to look at recent college graduates. And one of the reasons that they state in these kinds of studies is that there's a perception that younger people sometimes present as too precious to receive feedback. And so the curiosity muscle, in some cases, needs to get trained and built in a younger cohort. And I think that's one of the key things you're modeling for younger people is here you are, a professor who's actually in the process of teaching, but made better at everything you do by learning something new every day. And the way you approach leadership of the organization is through learning lens. So can you talk a little bit about that approach?
Yeah. My life took a number of really interesting twists and turns from when I was very, very young. In all sorts of ways. So relatively early in life, I think I learned. I don't want to say I learned to trust the process, because I don't know that I even really thought about it that way. But I learned that life does its thing, right? And you've got to sort of be prepared to react to that. So when people look at my journey, it's a lot of it has been being open enough to just, to take what life gives you and react to it. I have had as a mantra of mine for the longest while that I never want to stop asking myself what I want to be when I grow up. And I believe that, I say that now, and I hope I always continue saying that. And it speaks to that learning and that curiosity, right? Because it's not that I'm always looking ahead to the next step, but like I said, life has taken enough twists and turns for me from my time I was 9 years old, and both on the personal side, on the business side, even my education. I changed careers because of a conversation I had with somebody who realized something about me and presented me with an opportunity for an internship. And I came back from that internship and changed my major from civil engineering to electrical engineering. But at any step of the way, I was open to saying, what is this going to bring? And I have had conversations with colleagues of mine from my engineering days who, after we got laid off, that group of brilliant people, and I will call those people brilliant, were scattered to the four winds, right? And many of them are now working for other big, tech companies and so on in the semiconductor industry. Others went off to do other kinds of things. I had a conversation years later with a former colleague who said, because he found that I was at Rollins, he reached out to me and he said, I always knew you would land on your feet because you were never afraid to take that risk of doing something totally different.
Do you think that comes from, you're an American national, but you were raised expatriate in Trinidad and Tobago? Do
Correct,
you think having to navigate as an immigrant to another culture gave you the kind of suppleness to approach change and approach differences with curiosity so that you could be made resilient? Do you think that had anything to do with informing that process?
I'm sure that had a lot to do with it, right? Because you and I have had conversations about something that's near and dear to our heart, which is belonging. And so I was born in New York. Many people don't know that. I don't say that to a lot of people. When people ask me where I'm from, my general response is Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm kind of outing myself as a U.S.
You definitely don't have a Bronx accent, do you?
No, I definitely don't. I was born in the Bronx. But no, I left when I was 2 years old. I wasn't even really learning to speak that. But interestingly enough, I was to Jamaican parents, but moved to Trinidad and Tobago. So when I got there, I was not on a trajectory to sound a lot like a Trinidadian to begin with. But I always felt a little bit like an outsider, right? Growing up there, it was kind of interesting. I was just at the stage where I was finally really feeling like I fit in when I graduated high school. And it was like, okay, well, let me return to the U.S. and go to college, and landed in Washington, D.C. at Howard. Unfortunately, Howard is an amazingly diverse place. It's amazing in a lot of ways, but it's a really diverse place. So there were a lot of folks from the West Indies there, from the Caribbean. But at the same time, I was kind of very much an outsider again, and in a lot of ways. So I think yes, in a way, you get that openness to differences, that openness to what else is out there. It sort of has shaped my global perspective. It shaped my desire to learn about different cultures and all that sort of thing. But yeah, so I think that's all part of what's led to and fed some of the curiosity that I have, realizing that I'm a small floating speck in an ocean of wonderful things and what's out there, and wanting to dig more into that. And at the same time, realizing that I'm here for a reason. And part of my job is to figure out what that reason is.
Being vectored right to my office is one of those reasons.
Definitely one of it. But yeah, I'm thinking about what is it that I have to bring to this situation, and how can I develop in whatever space I'm in? How can I develop myself to be able to bring more to again, whatever are the communities I happen to be serving in that moment.
So one of the communities you serve, obviously, is in Central Florida's Winter Park. And to wrap up, and we've had a wonderful conversation, I do want to focus on belonging. And I want to make a marker on the fact that in the 103-year history of the Winter Park Chamber of Commerce, you are the first Black chamber board chair. And I hope that our listeners have seen that's probably the least interesting thing about you. There's so many other things that inform that decision. To put an exemplary business leader in a position of leadership, to be a role model for our constituent members, for our regional leaders, for the businesses that we serve. But I want to thank you for being willing to stand in that moment, that history-making moment, to signify that the organization is curatorial about the way we approach belonging, is curatorial about the leadership teams that we've built so that we can be more competitive, so that we can attract and retain the best people to what we're doing. Can you talk a little bit about that occasion and what that means to you?
Sure. Yeah, I can. One of the things from my first exposure to being on your board, on the board of the chamber, was how diverse it was, and by that I'm diverse in age, in gender, in ethnicity, but really diverse in broader and, to a certain extent, more fundamental ways. You may or may not know, but for about a decade or more, I led and taught a workshop I developed called Aligning People and Passions, which got to the crux of what I thought was some of the fundamental differences that we face in the workplace, how we are wired, emotionally, and how we connect with people and things like that, and then our own individual motivations and drivers. And in studying that and learning that, I realized that there are a lot of fundamentals around diversity that are a lot broader than the things we very often look at, the things we allow to separate us. So when I came to the board, I saw just a plethora of perspectives and ideas coming together in a way that would not in a confrontational way, but to bring the very best possible service to the chamber and to our community and the businesses that we serve. So when I look at the role, I see a lot of that. I see the power and the value in bringing together a broad range of perspectives, and I've admired the way that you have curated that on the board. And at the time, I was like, wow, this board feels very intentionally put together. That being said, I remember when I first came to teach at Rollins, when I first joined the staff, going to a event in Eatonville, and a member of the community, when I introduced myself, he put up his hand and he looked at me and he said to me, and this was again in a primarily African American community, and in an event where that would
Zora Neale Hurston's hometown.
Yeah, exactly right. And he looked at me, put his hand up, and he interrupted me, and he was like, "I never thought that place had anything for us." And that moment really, really struck me because it said something about the perspective, the perception.
Meaning Rollins never had anything for us.
Right, yes, yeah. And it said something to me deeply about the perception that Rollins and broader Winter Park community had, looking at it from externally and from some aspects even internally in the community. And I've watched that perception not 100% change, but I've seen enough of the community and been involved and around the college and the community of Winter Park enough to feel that there is a shift going on that can help change that perception from outside. So I'm really excited to be a part of that, and as I said, to look at my life and say, well, here I am today. I've put together a series of experiences, and hopefully, and along the way, I've been learning how can I bring the best of what and who I am to bear to serve that goal, among other things, but of helping there be a greater sense of belongingness. That everyone can be and part of this community and can thrive here, because I think that's the reality, but we need to express that more, and we need to communicate that more, and people need to really understand that this is a place that can be for everybody if we let it be.
And how much stronger are the communities that we serve as a result of your leadership and your presence? So I want to thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your story with us today. The takeaways for you all are that we do have something for you. We have today lessons in curiosity and staying resilient, staying supple, and allowing to sort of get into the slipstream of life and let it take you. But also the intentionality and the mindfulness of thinking about systems that are sustainable, that do have virtuous cycles attached to them. And we appreciate the work you're doing there. If people want to learn more information about Artifx or about you, where can they go to get more information?
Well, most people reach me through my role at Rollins, so you can find me there through the Crummer Graduate School of Business and their faculty list. Artifx Cafe, you can find us online at our website, www.artifxcafe.com, ARTIFX.
And we'll drop that in the show notes too, and you can go ahead and order some of that delicious coffee.
Yeah, you can learn more there about the purpose behind what we do and how we try to approach coffee and representing our farmers the best way we can.
Dr. Keith Whittingham, thank you so much for spending time with us today on the Bee Student Podcast. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.